Welcome back to the Gun Collective podcast. My name is John Patton. As per usual, we've got an excellent guest. I mean, I say that all the time, and I'm not kidding. We've got another excellent guest who's got tons of value for you guys this week. But first, we got to talk about the sponsors, Blackout Coffee. You got to go buy Blackout Coffee. Use our code TGC, buy our Tenacity blend, and get yourself a little bit of a morning boost. Tenacity is a nice, smooth, like a medium dark roast. It's got a little bit of extra caffeine. The link is blackoutcoffee.com/TGC and use the code TGC to get yourself a discount. Also, check out Vertex. It's VERTX.com. Some of the best EDC gear and apparel around. I literally use their gear every single day. I am not bullshitting you guys. This is something that you want to look at. If you use our code TGC, they'll give you at least 15% off, sometimes more. Depends on how froggy they're feeling. That's it. Again, is VERTX.com. Okay, we've got Jake here from Gridbase. And Jake, what is Gridbase? Can you just give us like the high level? Because we're going to get deep on comms a little bit. And I want to try and understand this from a very, very high level. What is Gridbase and what are you all about?
For sure. Absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on.
Of course.
You do such great work, and I'm really happy to be here. So also Vertex bags, great. Use them every day. So I second that.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about Gridbase. So to understand Gridbase, you have to understand my background a little bit. I'm not a tech guy. I didn't own a computer for most of my adult life. I was an iPhone turnkey app user only. So when Gridbase was developed, it was developed from the layman. It was developed as somebody who had no context or frame of reference for anything that I've built. But as they say, a man with a good why can conquer any how, right?
Oh,
And
okay.
so
I
I had a very big why, and I needed to find this capability, and I was willing to call out chunks of earth to dissect what exactly it was that I needed. And so it just puts me in a unique position to be able to discuss some of these things as the knuckle dragon Texan that I am, and having been involved in this for the few years now, I just have been able to understand it at a high level and translate that to people. But what is it that I'm translating? What is Gridbase? From a macro perspective, from a zoomed out perspective, it's the importance of decentralization, autonomy, and collaboration. So oftentimes what I mean by that is that these devices that are out there, and the kind of general ethos and humanistic understanding of devices is that everything's categorized and has specific use cases and all of this stuff, and there's been less of a focus on decentralized collaborative tech, and so you have to be
So what
bought
do you,
in.
when you're saying devices, give me an example of what you're talking about, because
Absolutely.
I'm not tracking.
For sure. So when I say devices, I mean like as far as cell phones, right? Cell phones
Okay.
in particular, right? We do not have a multi-tiered method of communication. We just
Right.
all have iPhones or Androids, right? That's not a decentralized method of communication.
No, it's not.
Uh, no, and it's all central to that one particular device. Or when as it pertains to information, right? When it pertains to how we get information, we go to the internet and we're dependent upon Google and the servers that they have for us to know about stuff. That's not a decentralized way for us to access information. So what people used to have was a ton of books, encyclopedias, walls and walls of that. We kind of lost that with time. As we lost that with time, we invested into infrastructure that other people own and that other people have access to. And we've seen over the last few years how people can manipulate and control that information so that you have an opinion one way or another, or so that the opinion you have can't be heard by other people. And so that's kind of the challenge that I'm tackling here is like, how do we disseminate, disperse, and own our own information? And that's really what Gridbase is all about. So we offer a line of products that have basically a localized internet in a small form factor that's not dependent upon GPS or satellites or cell service. It's a server in your hand, and you
Oh,
own that
okay.
information. And so, where we used to have all these books and everything to access that information, now we have it in the palm of our hand, and it's
So
no one else can take it, no one else can manipulate it. It's yours,
I want
and
to
you
try and
act.
understand
Sure, sure,
this.
sure.
So
Yeah,
when you say you have this small network,
right.
are we talking like a little like Wi-Fi thing? Like what is this small network? What is it based on?
Sure. So it's it is its own server. So let's talk about how the internet works, right? For those
Right.
who don't know or for those who have forgotten, right? You are searching something that's going to a server room under the water somewhere, 1,000 miles away, whatever. And then that information in that server room is being displayed back to you on your phone.
Okay.
Well, what if we removed that middle section and we just went from your phone to the server that was in your hand? We got rid of the middleman with that. You
And
see
what
what I'm
benefit
saying?
would that provide?
The benefit that it provides is that we don't have to have all of the different infrastructure in between your phone and the server room.
I see.
So we don't
So
have to go from cell tower to underwater cables that are cut by Houthis or whatever. All the different fail points within that system that we've seen recently. Kind of come about. The fragility in some of that infrastructure. The benefit of it is that there is no infrastructure between you and the information you're accessing. You have the infrastructure in your hand, and you have the device you're accessing it with in your other hand. So nobody's going to come between that. And yes, it operates over Wi-Fi. So it displays a Wi-Fi hotspot. You're connecting from your phone directly to that device, not from
Okay.
your phone to a network that has 1,000 links in between you and the information you're trying to access.
Can you give me an example of what kind of information? So you own the server. What are you keeping on this server?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're keeping. When I made the device initially, it was because my wife was pregnant.
Okay.
And I wanted a failsafe for if we weren't able to make it to the hospital, or if for whatever reason I had to give birth to my son on my own and then take care of my wife afterwards. I wanted to make sure that I had a resource to do that. I also
Okay.
wanted to make sure that that resource was collaborative in the sense that if my mom or my sister was there, that they could be accessing that data at the same time. This is what separates it from just saving files on your phone, is that more than one person can access this information at the same time, and it's searchable in much the same way that the internet is searchable. So instead of thumbing through a PDF, you can search for like bleeding out, right? And find
Okay.
the information on that in particular. So that's the collaborative aspect of the decentralized aspect, right? And so some of the information that is kept on there initially was medical. But as I started to develop at the time, it wasn't a product, it was just something for me. But as I started to develop it, I started to include all kinds of stuff. I like to shoot guns. I like to watch Grantham videos, right? But I don't have the opportunity to go spend inordinate amounts of time to practice SILs and to practice, small unit tactics. And so I wanted to be able to, I understand the concepts and I do get out to train regularly, but I needed something as a crutch to be able to get familiar with in the field to have some of these quick, fast resources, right? And so I
So
started
would
to
you
keep.
say that this is sort of repository of key information for whatever could come up in your life that you could access wherever you are without having to store that stuff on your phone and thumb
Yes.
through and try and locate all that stuff. It's like a
So you
home
asked about
base kind of
you
thing,
asked about the
right?
data that's on there. There's
Right.
language learning materials. There's ham radio, amateur radio stack exchanges, which are searchable FAQs basically to go through and find answers to stuff. As far as the stack exchanges go, or the FAQs, those range from motor vehicle maintenance to mechanical engineering, electrical
Oh wow.
engineering. I mean, the idea behind what I kept on there was to be able to rebuild civilization from this device alone, if this is all you had. So there's K through
Okay.
12 education programs on there. All of Wikipedia is on there. And sometimes when
You
we
say
talk
all
about.
hold on. You say
Yes,
all of Wikipedia is on there?
the entirety of Wikipedia is on there and it's searchable and the hyperlinks work. So if I go to the page about Chile and then I want to see more about like Argentina and that's in a hyperlink or whatever, I can click that and it's going to open me up to the entire Wikipedia
I
page.
mean,
There is nothing
how much
different.
data is there?
Yeah, so if you under this is getting too technical, but to put it simply, terabytes, but it's all compressed.
I
Now,
see, I see.
now
So
let me
you
explain this real
compress the
quick.
data. So
Right?
I wanna make sure I understand. So
Of
you're
course.
grabbing this immense amount of data, you're compressing it, and then contained within the server is a way to decompress that information and then give you access to the stuff that you're calling for from the server, correct?
Right. So as you follow the hyperlink to Argentina, Chile compresses and Argentina uncompresses.
Okay,
And this
so
happens
that's interesting.
seamlessly. This happens seamlessly without any sort. There's no hiccup, right? It's just moving like how Wikipedia moves on your website, like on your regular computer. So this is happening seamlessly in the background. It's not something the end user has to do to double click, unzip, or anything like that.
Sure.
This is happening seamlessly, much more similarly to the way that you would access it on a website.
That's fascinating, honestly.
So,
So you've
real,
basically got a
yeah, go ahead.
mobile command center to rebuild society,
Yes,
right? Like, and then within that, that sort of ecosystem that you're creating around yourself and your family and your sort of team, so to speak, you are creating a communications network to disseminate such information. Is that accurate?
that is accurate.
Holy shit, that's fucking amazing.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's
So
super cool.
I'd be remiss to there's a company in Switzerland that is a nonprofit called Kiwix. And
Okay.
Kiwix has developed a lot of the backbone of the software that I use to create these products. And Kiwix has been around for over a decade. And they have full software engineers and all this kind of stuff, right? Well, we are an official partner of Kiwix, and we are their
Okay.
hardware supplier. So Kiwix's
Okay.
original mission was to support missionaries and teachers who were abroad who were teaching K through 12 programs on like STEM classes, and that's why language learning and all this kind of stuff is in there. I've added other stuff in there, such as the Marine Corps winter and summer field survival manuals, right? But there's other stuff in there that they used for missionaries in austere locations and people who were going to austere locations to be able to survive off the grid. So I want to be clear about the fact that sometimes when I talk about this, it sounds too good to be true. And it's not. We had over 500 units sold between May and December of last year with absolutely zero returns. Our customers are very happy. The stuff works, but that's not entirely a testament to Gridbase as much as it is a testament to our partners at Kiwix who've been developing the software for over a decade. So,
That's wild.
yeah,
I I'm trying to think of how, like, what application that wouldn't be valuable in. Like, where would you not need something like that? Because when I think about myself, and really this is how I think a lot of people go, well, how would that apply to my life, right? How would that apply to me? And I think what's really interesting is I if I'm not mistaken, this thing fits inside of a Pelican case.
well, we have multiple products that we sell. The smallest product is Pocket, and I'm a terrible businessman here. I don't have
No,
one
no, no, it's
immediately
fine.
accessible
People
to me,
people can go to
but yeah,
gridbase.net
yeah,
to
yeah.
see all
It,
this
it fits
stuff.
in the size of your hand, and it's in an S3 case, which is a very compliant, waterproof, shockproof case that fits in the size of your hand, and
And
you don't
that's
have
the
to
small
remove it.
one. But,
That's the
like, for
small one.
me, I think, okay, so it's small form factor in a general sense because it's not this giant, server rack, right?
Right, right.
I used to work in a data center. I have seen server racks. I worked
Sure.
for one of the biggest uh, IPs on the East Coast. I worked for them. I seen the inside, and when I think of this, I go, well, if I'm out in the van and I'm in a spot that no longer has cell service, or in a scenario where like what happened recently where my cell service provider goes down for a given period of time and I need to access crucial information for whatever reason, I could have my own localized Wi-Fi where all that stuff is readily accessible. I mean, that's fascinating to me. So you're basically carrying around this restart manual, like for the car guys out there, it's like the old school Haynes manuals where you could basically rebuild a freaking car from the manual. And you've
Right.
got all this. Are you the one like supplying the data, or do you just go, okay, here's our base package, add to it as you will? How's that work?
No, so the first of all, I want to provide language real quick to say that, the question, what would I do without the internet, prevails across everyone, right? Because we're so dependent upon it. And so the question, what would I do without the internet, is what I've sought to answer with this, right? So kind of
Right.
summing up that thought that you had. The question that you had asked just now escaped me. You asked about the information that's on there.
Yeah.
Um,
Are you like the curator of
I
said
am I
information?
am the curator, correct. So I went through and handpicked every single relevant thing that I could possibly find. The Canadian Prepper has a video about packing a 3-day bag. I included that on there. So
The
there's
video is on there?
the actual video is on there, correct.
Does he know
Yeah,
that?
yes, he does.
Okay.
Yeah, he's actually allowed that stuff to be a free license for
Sure.
projects like this, and so it's very
Somebody
cool.
call Mike
So
Jones and get some of his videos on there.
we should. But there's also like all of the tons of TED Talks. One thing that I wanted to address, is like the mental health when you are in a stressful scenario like that can be extremely taxing. As taxing as not having water, it could be
Sure.
just as threatening. Or for veterans who are suffering from that kind of thing, right? And so I made sure to include a lot of mental health resources on there. So there's TED Talks from veterans who talk about dealing with stress and PTSD. So there's also like a mental health element to this too,
Wow.
which is something that I think is often overlooked because we're talking about the necessities, right? We're like, okay, well, how do I set up a shelter and all this? Like, yes, but how does life carry on outside of the necessities? Because if you're capable, the necessities will very quickly collect themselves, right? But then what about life? What about keeping your kids educated and in school? Not because they need to be in school, but because you have to keep normalcy in the regimen of a child. That's for health, right? What kind of resources can we provide on there that keep people, that allow them to think and remain free in a stressful environment and to deal with depression and to deal with isolation? So there's a whole bunch of TED Talks on there from cancer survivors, amputees, veterans. Like I took all of TED Talk, I took everything that I possibly could that would provide value in this kind of situation and put it on there. And I carefully curated that over a year's time of grabbing information that I could. And I have not found one person who was disappointed with what was on there. Most people haven't even gotten through everything that's on
I mean, there's
there.
not a chance in hell I would ever try to get through all of that. There's not like I
Yeah,
just wouldn't ever. Now,
right,
the question then becomes, can a user add data that they feel is relevant and valuable to their life? Is that something that's
right.
easily done?
So this is what I encourage people to do who have that question. That is a great opportunity to save it to your phone, right? We don't want everything on one device because if that one device, God forbid it gets lost or it falls off a plane or whatever,
Sure.
we don't necessarily want to have all of our eggs in that one basket. That's not a functionality that I've included in it. Its value to me is in what it is. If you want to add your own repositories and things like that, that's something that I encourage people to save it on a thumb drive, put it on your phone, add to your own repository and create your own repository, having the peace of mind that I've done the lion's share of the work, right? You
Sure.
can save your couple of things that you need that are specific to you, local to you.
So I
But
know I know
right,
the reason I asked that is because one of the concerns that people will have in large scale is that this is your slant on what is necessary information. And there is bias. You cannot remove personal bias from anything. So I was just curious if that was an option. But I also understand in the theme of decentralization, save your, the stuff that you feel is valuable to your other device or something like that, and use this as sort of a base station. Does that make sense?
it
Am I on
does.
the right track?
It does. And when you say bias, like as an example, like including all of Wikipedia, like I cannot input bias into Wikipedia. It
That's
is just
fair.
Wikipedia.
True, true, true.
So, when I collected this information, um, I would like to believe it to be the case that it is free of bias because I just grabbed collections of things that were already existing. So, in the example of Wikipedia, like I didn't just include the Wikipedia articles that like resonated with me. There's all of Wikipedia is on there. And so that's the case with like the TED Talk stuff. Like some of the TED Talks on there are kind of like left leaning liberal ideologies with mental health. Like that's not really my thing. That's not my take on it, but it is important in the discussion of mental health.
Okay.
So, in including those TED Talk repositories, I didn't just pick the ones that identified with my ideologies. I grabbed the entire TED Talk as they published it for mental health, right?
Sure.
And included that whole thing. So some of my, um, you know, bias. It can't really be input because of the way that I grabbed things. I didn't just
Okay.
grab those specific ones. But yeah, it's a fair criticism, and yeah, people will want to add to it. And what I'll say to
Yeah.
that, without saying too much more of it, is that Kiwix is working on allowing that to be a functionality. When they unroll
Yeah.
that, I'll unroll that. But currently, the stability of the device would be made less fragile and less robust by allowing people that functionality. So to be clear, it's not a
Mm,
matter of me gatekeeping the ability. I would love to create an opportunity for people to have that ability, but I can't do that while sacrificing the robustness of what's there. So
Sure.
when we can do those two things at the same time, absolutely we will do them.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I didn't even think of it from a position of, this thing has to quote unquote survive in numerous scenarios, endless scenarios. So we've got this base. I'm trying to think of like, okay, if I'm out there, I've got this base station, and I'm just calling it like I don't know if that's your name for it, but that's what in my mind, I've got this sort of base station of information, and I'm in this position of out in the middle of nothing, and I need to access that, and I need to build a communication network. So one of the things that comes to my mind, and this is where I'm going, is when you're out of cell range for whatever reason, or out of satellite range, etc., you need to be able to communicate with those on your squad, your team, etc., potentially others in a given area. How do you recommend people do that? I of course I
Take it.
ask you as you're taking a
No,
drink.
no, I needed a drink. I knew I was going to need a drink of water to answer this one, right?
So let's go baby steps. Let's go baby. I know
Sure.
there's a lot to this
Well,
pyramid of stuff.
you mentioned something that's like real close to me, which is just communication contact, and it's a part of the decentralized conversation, right? Alternative methods of being able to communicate. But one thing that I thought that was interesting was like you mentioned team, and I encourage people. And this isn't to challenge what you were saying. I'm just offering another perspective. But I encourage people to start with communicating with your wife or your spouse or your kids at home. Develop a plan that allows you to communicate to your home when you are away from home. Because
Okay.
if you can be successful in that, then you can absolutely be successful in the other endeavors. Now, not just from an actual functional material device standpoint, radio standpoint, but also in getting your wife on board with comms, right? That in and of itself is something that is a skill set that you should be able to practice. And if you cannot do that, it's going to be much more difficult to do the rest. Now, when I approached my wife to do comms, I told her this, guys, you can take this one from me. I said, honey, you're the most important person in the world to me. And I love you to death. And the worst possible thing that could ever happen would be that I lose contact with you. And I just really don't want that to happen. And as the leader of our household, I have some ideas that would help me stabilize contact so that we never lose communication with one another. And do you know what my wife did? What do I need to do? Sign me up. I'll get on board with comms. And so when you approach things appropriately to your wife, I didn't say like, all right, you know, the frogs are gay, like I didn't do all that. I just was like, I was being, and that's real. I love my wife. I would
They're
hate to lose.
turning the frogs
Yeah, they're
gay.
turning the freaking frogs gay. No,
Oh
I
man.
really did mean that. And so we started to develop a comms plan when she would go to the park with my son, when she would run into the grocery store. We just started to slowly implement these things in our day-to-day life. And my wife has fun with it. Her call sign that she just makes up is what is it? Crochet Slut 69. That's what she's chosen as her call sign. So she gets on the radio and she's like, this is Crochet Slut 69, and she just has a ball with it.
That's
And it's
funny.
fun. It doesn't all have to be doom and gloom, my team and all this stuff. We
Sure.
talk about implementing comms. We need to talk about integrating it in our day-to-day life with the people that matter most to us. And as we do that, we naturally become integrated with being able to be the RTO for our team. Right. And so
What is
from a
RTO?
the range technician officer, the radio technician officer, it's a
Okay.
military term for the radio guy, right? Um,
Right. So
and
so
so
let's back up. Let's back up a second. You said that you started, when your wife is out at the grocery store or the park and she's going to communicate with you. What system, like what are you using to do that? Are you using GMRS? Are you using ham? Like
right.
what give me some specifics so I understand what that is.
Yes. So before I do that, I want to say that no one system is the system to use. Each system is going to be something that's particular for the task that you're doing. So in the
I
case of the
actually
park,
had I had a buddy of mine who was an RTO tell me that exact thing. He said
yes.
there is no one solution. So keep that in mind. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So for my wife down at the park, it's a real short range. I don't have high range requirements. I don't have encryption requirements. I don't have, you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So a regular handheld walkie talkie from Walmart fits the bill. It doesn't
Okay.
have to be some crazy thing. It's just a way for us to maintain contact, right? And so that she doesn't have to be on her phone. I don't want my wife being unaware of her surroundings. So the radio, being able to use that, allows my wife to be more aware of her surroundings, and she can give me constant updates, not just on whether or not she's in danger, but like, what is my son doing? Is he climbing over a log? Did he just fall in the pond? Like, what's happening? You know? And so she can kind of give me those updates, and it's better than a picture, it's better than a phone call. And usually she wouldn't call me, she's engaged with our son, but with radio it's allowed her to be able to give me constant updates. And unfortunately, I'd like to be there, and many times I am, but sometimes I'm here in the shop and I can't go. And so when I
Okay.
can't,
So
she's allowed to give me those options. So we're using handheld regular walkie-talkie radios. Now I do have GMRS radios, we do that sometimes, but I want to
sure.
address this really quickly, is that when you're talking about setting someone up with a radio, you have to look at their proficiency level from a technical standpoint. I don't want to give my wife a radio that has a bunch of different buttons and knobs so that she could accidentally get off the right channel, right? I want to give her something that's easy for her to use. And as we grow with that, and as she has familiarity with that, I'm sure she will be able to program a radio in the face. But I'm giving her a radio that she can't mess up so that we don't lose contact. So that's why I choose that. Now, another buddy of mine who has a higher proficiency level, I may give him a different radio. But I'm
Okay.
engineering the system in such a way to where she can't mess it up. I'm not expecting my wife to like get fully up to speed and be able to program a radio on these complicated radios. I just would like her to push a button and give me an update, and we start there.
I think that's a great place to start. To give the listeners an example, I drove cross country. I live here in Pennsylvania, and obviously with the van project, I'm all over the country. And I met up with a friend in St. Louis on my way west to Colorado along whatever corridor. I think it's 65. I don't remember. 25 maybe. One of those vertical roads, north south. And one of the things we did was immediately get radios in hand so that we could just, if we split up for whatever reason, somebody's got to go get fuel and then catch back up. So any number of reasons, we had that instant communication, or near instant, I should say. Um, and that is one of the things that a lot of guys will do. It was a simple walkie-talkie from what I recall. It was a Motorola product, but the point is, that little thing saves, needing the reliance is less on cellular networks and more on pushing a little button and those
Right.
things cranking out a signal, which is interesting.
So what's the difference between a Walmart walkie-talkie and another radio? Why would you choose one versus the other,
Yeah, I'd
right?
love to hear that. I would.
Yeah. Yeah, so walkie-talkies do not have removable antennas. So license-free walkie-talkies, like what you would get at Walmart, this is a fixed antenna, and that is a regulation placed by the FCC. So for these to be FCC compliant, they have to have a static antenna. They also have a limitation on the amount of power that they're allowed to output. So they're only allowed to put out 1 watt, so on. Whereas when you get into some of these more advanced radios, I can put out 10 watts on this radio, or 8 watts, and I have the option to put different antennas on here that give me increased range. Now, antennas in and of themselves do not increase range, but what they do is they increase the efficiency of the power being output from the radio. And
Okay.
so that's what separates it. This right here, I've made contacts with this with nothing in between 40 miles. So I've
Wow.
done that. Now line of
When you say
sight,
nothing in between,
a repeater, any
okay.
kind of network, because you could go from here to a repeater to another radio. That's different. But
So
when you
that
go
was
from,
radio to radio communication.
and the term for that is simplex. So it's simplex contact from radio to radio. It's simplex. There's nothing in between.
Okay.
And so
All right.
so the dependency, the thing that depends on, no, most importantly, beyond power, is line of sight. If you're on the other side of a valley and as the crow flies, it's only 2 miles away, we're not going to be able to make contact because we don't have line of sight with one another, right? And so line of sight was the benefit that I had in making that 40-mile contact, was that there was tons of flat land here in Texas that we were able to make that happen on. But it wouldn't have happened on something like this because it lacks the power to be able to punch out that far,
I
right?
see.
So
Okay.
that's the difference between a handheld walkie-talkie that you would get from Walmart versus a pro radio, or something that has more capability. Is this is licensed as a ham radio or a GMRS radio, right? They're licensed differently, and because they're licensed differently by the FCC, they have different capabilities, namely removable antennas and higher power outputs.
Wow. I want to take a second to let that sink in. So what we're going to do is plug Blackout Coffee one more time.
Let's do it.
I think really what you need to do, listeners, viewers, etc. Jake, you also need to do this.
Genuinely.
Is go to blackoutcoffee.com/TGC, take a peruse around there. And hey, if you don't drink coffee, which a lot of people do not, you can grab yourself some of their, I believe it's called Cocoa Sips. They got hot cocoa, bro. It's good. It's legit good. They are not giving you the store-bought hot cocoa that's a ton of garbage in there. This is not what this is. That's not what this product is. They also have some of the best tea that I've ever had in my entire life. And I'm not talking, just the chaff that you get in those little tea bags from the store. This is not, Blackout Coffee doesn't do that. This is good stuff. It's got pieces of real fruit, real tea, harvested in a way that produces a much, much better flavor. You got to go get some. blackoutcoffee.com/TGC and use vertex.com and plug in that code TGC to get yourself a discount on a bag, shirt, gear for your vehicle, etc. I've got a whole bunch of bags for my vehicle. I've got the backpack that I use every single time I travel. It's the backpack and their carry-on luggage, and it's fantastic. The code is TGC at vertx.com. Okay, so we got a basic understanding of these radios, right? We've got the high point of radios, and then we've got the sort of step up from there, which would be, sort of fancier. I don't know if it's fair to call it a knight's armament of radios. I'm trying to relate this to so people have some kind of understanding.
Let's do it this way.
But hold on.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
We've got these two different kinds of radios, right? One that has the ability to crank out some power and really stretch out.
Right.
And then we've got within this ecosystem, we've got two ways of communicating, right? We've got this GMRS, which I don't even know what that means. And then we've got ham. Those are two very, very common terms. What do those mean?
Sure. Yeah, the knight's armament is a good correlation. So yeah, what do those mean? So ham is amateur radio. Amateur radio, each one of these things has their own frequency allocation, right? Let's say we only have 10 spots. We can't let everybody on all 10 spots. We have to have some people over here in this little column. We got to have some people over here in this little column. That way we don't get people crossing over into stuff, right?
Okay.
And so these allocations for GMRS, General Mobile Radio Service, those bands are allocated for GMRS. And the benefit of GMRS is that in comparison to ham, and I'll get there, in comparison to ham, is that you don't have to go take a test, right? You just pay $35 online, you get your license, you can then transmit on GMRS frequencies, right? The ham stuff requires a license and whatever, If we're going to talk about cars, the first question I'm not going to say like, well, do you have your Class C license? I don't care. We're just talking about cars. I'm a car guy. So it's kind of like the licensing things here or there. But specifically, technically speaking, legally speaking, when you have that license, it allows you to operate on those ham bands. Now, the ham bands have, in most cases, better propagation characteristics, meaning that you can actually use frequencies that allow you to communicate further, whereas GMRS does not feature those bands in particular.
Okay.
And so it's similarly to like CB, that's Citizens Band. Everybody knows what a CB radio is.
Sure.
So CB is license free. Don't need a license. You can just hop on there and do it. So if we know what CB is, then we can understand the difference between what CB and something else is. So CB is one allocation of bands set aside for that purpose. GMRS is another allocation of bands that's set aside for that purpose. And ham radio or amateur radio is another set of bands that's set aside for that purpose.
Okay. Wow, this is I think it's so fascinating that this is not, at least in my world, this just doesn't get talked about all that much. We spend in the firearms industry, we spend so much time talking about gear and guns and ballistics and all of these things, the terminal effect. But we did, and much the same thing could be said about medical. We do not spend enough time talking about how to communicate effectively. And this is super fascinating. So we've got these sort of three columns of bands, and these are communication wavelengths, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we've got these three sort of bands. We've got GMRS, ham, and CB. And it sounded earlier like your recommendation is to have a solution for communicating on each one of those individual things. Is that accurate?
It is accurate. And with
Okay.
the firearms industry we were talking about, when I put a Mod Light OKW on my rifle, the effects of me turning that on at night are immediately identifiable. When I put a 1:6 optic on my, 16-inch rifle, the effects of that are immediately, like, I can understand how that's an advantage. And I think the cognitive dissonance or the disassociation between radio and the firearms thing, and why people don't talk about it as much, is because when I buy this radio, now what? It doesn't do anything for me. And I
Right?
think
You're
that
not wrong. You're not
the
wrong.
the way that I recommend people tackle this, if you want to get into it, is there is a USB. It's called a dongle. It's a software defined radio dongle. SDR is what it's called. You
Okay.
can plug that into your computer, and you can use free software. In particular, SDR plus plus is a great software, and you can then start to visually see the radio sphere around you. Not only can you visually see it through your speakers, you can hear it. So with the SDR setups that I have at my house, I can hear the local construction crew. Not only can I hear them, I can
Huh.
see them. I can tune into my local radio station and I can listen to the radio. So software defined radio, it allows you a full spectrum listening capability to everything from like 1 megahertz to one gigahertz or whatever, right? Different SDRs have different ranges, but it
Okay.
allows you to listen in a very wide range. And
And
what I
is
say,
is this thing basically like a little antenna for your computer? Is that what that is?
you
The
have to put an
SDR?
antenna on it. That the SDR is actually just a computer processor that processes the radio waves that
I
are
see.
already out
I
there
see.
free flowing. But you can use that in so like obviously that's going to help you better see the radio spectrum and help you better understand what this looks like. And I think that going back to the thing of like, yeah, if you throw a mod light, it's immediately identifiable. But buying a radio, it's not immediately identifiable. I think SDR bridges that gap in turning the invisible monster of RF into something that's visually quantifiable. And the other
Okay.
thing is using this is a directional antenna. So it focuses the receive or the transmit in a beam, right?
Okay.
And one thing that you can do is you can hook up an SDR dongle to your phone and you can hook the antenna. You could use this antenna and then you could scan like this to see where radio frequencies are coming from. So if you have a piece of property and you're standing, no one should be out there, right? And you're
Right.
just looking at this SDR graph and you're using this antenna, you could very easily identify, why is there radio frequency coming from the middle of my property? That should not be happening. Oh, and you know that there's different bands, right? You know, there's CB, GMRS, ham radio bands. So you could look and you could say, wow, that's in the GMRS band. Why is there a GMRS band frequency coming from the middle of my property? So
Huh.
SDR, while it is a great training tool, it also has tactical applications. Utilizing antennas and something like that. This could be done with a $40 software-defined radio plugged into your Android phone with a $30 directional antenna off Amazon. We don't have to spend a lot of money to get good capability. It's about
That's wild.
understanding the fundamentals and how they work to be able to apply them to the given scenario.
So do you let's say so you can spend, you know, under $100 and have a really interesting setup for finding those things and identifying those things.
Yes.
Um, is it one of those things that, like, when you start spending more money, because everybody likes to have cool guy gear, everybody loves that. If you don't like cool guy gear, we're not friends, right?
Right, right.
So if you start spending that more money, where does the drop off of diminishing returns start to happen?
Sure. Well, I'll give you a quick example. So I have some buddies that are in Ukraine that were using very advanced $6,000 a piece radios.
Okay.
That on their person was about $18,000 worth of radio equipment. That radio equipment put out a very identifiable EW signature, right?
What
So
is EW?
electronic warfare. So it's like
Okay.
that they were emanating a very particular identifiable type of RF. Other people are doing this in the battle space in Ukraine, right? So
Okay.
that's happening. People are looking at the radio frequencies around them to determine, does someone have a cell phone over there? Or do they have tactical radios over there? Whatever, right?
Can
So
you
this was
identify sort of friend or foe based on that information? Is that possible?
it is with enough information, right?
Right,
So
right, right.
In
That
some
that assumes you know what they generally operate in and all that sort of
right.
thing. Okay.
So yes, if you knew friend or foe, right, you could identify. Now, in some cases, you can get really advanced and you can do what's called IMSI catching, and you can identify like who the cell carrier is for what cell phone is in that person's pocket, right?
Wow.
So that's happening over there in real time.
Wow.
Um, so yes, you can get very specific with that. But what was happening in this case was that they kept getting identified on this very particular wavelength, right? And so they switched back from using those radio systems to using more generic radio systems, like I showcased earlier, because it allowed them to blend in easier from an RF spectrum, right? So you asked about where does the point of diminishing returns happen when you start spending more money? It's all specific to the application. It is you could have a SAS rifle that's completely built, with a Night Force optic and all of that, or you have a lot of money invested in that build. But if you're doing home defense, it does you no good. you know? And so
Running
it's
around your house with a 5 to 25 scope would be very fun.
yeah, it would be very funny. So it's not necessarily that there's a diminishing return on spending more money. It's that understanding where the money should be spent to develop your comms plan for your situation, right?
Okay.
So HF radio, we'll touch on it for a second. HF radio works by bouncing off of the atmosphere. We'll just say that, right? You should have a takeoff angle of your radio, frequency. It bounces off the atmosphere and lands somewhere else. So that's how you're able to talk 1,000 miles away with nothing in between. It's on HF, and it has to do with the propagation characteristics of that radio frequency and the wavelength. We're not going to go any
Okay.
more deeper than that.
Sure.
But if your requirement is to communicate with a family member that's 300 miles away or 1,000 miles away, then you're going to need $1,000 HF radio, and you're going to need to become proficient with that, and you're going to need to have the antennas for that, right? There's other ways to skin that cat. This is also a DMR radio, and what it does is it goes from the radio to the internet here in my house, and then it gets spat back out at the internet at a friend's house, and then they pick it up. So there's multiple ways to be able to communicate long distances, but this one is dependent upon the internet. HF is not dependent upon the internet.
So
Now,
DMR is what?
digital mobile radio.
Okay. So that one relies on the quote unquote Internet of Things being functional.
Correct.
And the
Correct.
idea to go back to this idea of decentralization, having both gives you different tools in the toolbox. Is that right?
Correct. That is
Okay.
correct.
Okay. I think I'm starting to understand this a little bit better because I mean, when I start to think of when would I need sort of long distance comms with a radio, when would I need that? For me personally, that could be a scenario where I'm out on the road again or out hunting or whatever. And I've got family here on the East Coast that I would like to be able to communicate with. Having a way to do that would be pretty
Right.
freaking rad.
DMR would be a great way to cut that because I'm assuming that you're going to have Starlink on your van,
Yes,
and so
100%.
you could run a DMR hotspot off your Starlink, and you could set them up with this at the house. And using a small radio like this, you could be able to communicate. It would go straight from here into the Starlink, upload, and then would get spat back out over to them over there,
Dude,
right? So
we need to do something where like you and I dig like a video or something together. You're in Texas, right?
correct.
Yeah. When I come through Texas, that's actually where the guy I had on the show with the beef tallow company, that guy was awesome. And it'd be cool to do a video where we talk about comms from the van and like what
Yeah,
that looks like and
right,
what a good strategy would be. That'd be a
for
lot of
sure.
fun. I think that's
You,
super interesting.
this started for me. So before I was married, I lived in a van for 3 years,
Oh, that's
and
right. You did tell me that. That's
that
amazing.
was that was in like 2016,
Okay.
and I was still
OG
a
van.
liberal then, by the way. Like I didn't even like guns. Like I
Oh,
voted for
wow.
Bernie
Okay.
Sanders. Yeah, a lot's changed since then, right? But at that time, that this off grid thing kind of started to happen for me in the van. I started to get solar panels, and I started to get a water purification systems, and I started looking at needing a way to communicate in the van in these austere locations. And that was even prior to my wife having our son and me developing Gridbase. That was my introduction to understanding a need for this kind of thing. And I very much, I'm super passionate about van life and mobile living and off grid living and all of that. And that started for me in the van. where I began to research, what a Baofeng was. I bought a Baofeng and I left it unprogrammed. It was not functional. I bought a Baofeng because it made me feel better, and then I didn't do anything with it for years after that because I didn't understand it. And so to be in a position now to be able to demystify some of these things, especially in the context of your van or whatever, is extremely full circle and fulfilling for me because I was that guy that bought a Baofeng and then never figured out how to program it because there was no good resources out there to help me understand what it was that I was even doing.
Yeah, I mean, I when I start to think of that, you see these radios that have tons of buttons all over the front. I wouldn't even know where to start. I'd
Yeah.
flip that manual open and go, nope, and close it right back up.
Yeah. Me too. It's what I
You know?
did. Yeah. But I'm very like I said, it's about how big your why is, and the bigger your why is, the easier the how becomes. My why back then wasn't very big. I had nothing to lose. No family, no wife, no kids. It was just me out there. It's like if I just died from a mountain lion attack, that just was what it was. Didn't really care. But as my why got a lot bigger, my how became a lot more important, and I started to clout chunks of earth to figure it out. And I think a lot of people now, the reason why I'm on this show or the reason why there's buzz about it now is because the failing infrastructure is showing people that, hey, there's kind of a reason to get into this. And collectively, people's why is becoming a lot more tangible and understandable. And so now we have more people invested in figuring out the how.
Mm. I think it's quite fascinating, and I want you guys listening to understand that I am well aware that this is far more complicated than we can get into on a single episode of the podcast. Like this is not something we can fully encompass in an hour. Like that's not a thing. But what I want to try and understand here is how this would apply. So we talked about the walkie talkies, and we have these different concepts of how one would communicate. How, like, let's say I'm out hunting or whatever. I'm somewhere away from home and I'm trying to reach the East Coast. Is there like a best solution for doing that? Like, let's say 2,000 miles. What
Sure.
would I do? How would I accomplish said goal?
Right. So, one thing that I'm not sponsored by this company, there's no kickback, there's no personal or professional affiliation. So I have no skin in the game. So this is a
Okay.
genuine take on their product. But Rapid Radios, I'm sure people have seen them. I have a really aggressive marketing campaign. And frankly, I don't agree with their marketing at all because they are selling people a lie to a certain extent. It's kind of like solar salesmen. We're going to
Oh
get your
boy.
bill down, right? Um, that's not really the case, and that's not why you should buy it. However, it is a good way to have long range communications. Now, how it's different from a cell phone is that their radios are able to operate on the full spectrum of LTE and all of those different cell tower stuff. So where we're
Whoa,
locked into
that's
AT and
interesting.
T, right? So if the AT and T tower is down, then we're down. But Rapid Radios can hop over. It can go over to T-Mobile. It can go over to different channels of AT&T. A lot of people don't know that like law enforcement is on a different channel of AT&T than like me and you on our cell
Right,
phones are.
right.
And Rapid Radios takes advantage of those channels. And so it's not just a cell phone radio, right? It's kind of a little more than that. But because it's LTE, you can talk nationwide on it, right? You can
Is
talk
that
from
something they
anywhere.
charge like a monthly fee for?
It's an annual fee, and this is
Okay.
again about my marketing thing with them, man, is that they go, "There's no monthly fees." Well, that's a little misleading because there's an annual fee. So, again, I don't like their marketing, and I don't really appreciate the way that they're attacking that, but you cannot deny the turnkey functionality that they offer for people looking for an alternative method of communication.
Yeah,
Now,
that's wild. I didn't even know that was a thing.
when the cell towers went out, I did hear reports of some people saying that theirs didn't work, right? So not every single thing is going to be the best option, but it might be for those road trips where you're just trying to maintain, comms for, hey, I'm going to stop and get gas, or we broke down, or whatever. It's going to be a better alternative than just a Walmart walkie-talkie, right? So it does fit into a comms plan somewhere. But more importantly, I think that it also serves as a vehicle to get people excited about radio, and they do that in a good way. They do offer a fairly priced, good product that functions in that way. But you do need to understand that their marketing is less than savory, and that they do have some pitfalls, such as the annual fee or whatever, right?
I
So
heard a phrase a long time ago that has always stuck with me is marketers ruin everything.
they do,
And
they
it's not
do,
they're not wrong. They're not wrong.
yeah.
I mean,
But
it's all about manipulation. Anyway, that's a different
right,
conversation.
right. Totally.
So this rapid radio is a good solution for something like that. Would there be a different solution? So say I'm out overlanding with some buddies or whatever in the middle of nowhere. Is there a better solution for that sort of application?
Absolutely. So real quickly, Meshtastic has this buzzword in the comms community, and it's terrible. Do not invest in any Meshtastic hardware at
Okay.
all,
Okay.
ever. Okay. But understand that the idea of mesh and mesh networks is good. Meshtastic sucks. Okay.
Okay.
So when we're talking
So
about
is that like a
actual,
Kleenex type thing, like a brand name that people
no,
use?
no, they took mesh and then they thought that they owned the word. But
Oh,
I
oh,
have extensive experience with mesh. I have tried to make it work, and there's actually, without violating NDAs, there's actually hardware limitations that make it to where they're going to always be dysfunctional. So anyway, do not invest in Meshtastic unless you're a hobbyist and you like tinkering around with electronics and like making a contact sometimes, then it's totally for you. But if you're looking for like a real off-grid communication solution, Meshtastic is not it. The best alternative to Meshtastic is there's a company that's actually been around for a long time called Beartooth.
okay.
And for full transparency, I am sponsored by them, but I don't do that just because, right? Like they actually provide a really good product, and they offer a product that provides actual real turnkey functionality mesh networks. And so it's a little
Okay.
radio like this here, and you just turn it on and you connect it to your phone. And now it has GPS in it, so you can see where your other buddy is at. You can make you can this is also like over 20 miles. Like it's a pretty wide range. And because it's a mesh network, they automatically link to each other. So if you're 80 miles ahead and your buddy is 80 miles behind you, but you guys have two guys in between you, you're still all maintaining the same contact, because that's what a mesh network is. It's like a repeater, a Wi-Fi repeater, right?
So
So
I'm
it's
I'm gonna make a comparison, and you tell me if I'm correct.
Go ahead.
And are you at all a gamer?
No, sir.
Okay.
No.
So what it sounds like is when you're in something like Call of Duty and you have a squad,
Mhm.
you can communicate with your squad anywhere in a given area, like anywhere on the map. You
Mhm.
never lose communication with your squad because you have this what would be a mesh network. Is that
Right.
accurate?
I don't play the game, so I don't have a full understanding of
Right. That's
exactly what it is you're talking about, but it sounds to me like it would be accurate. Now,
okay.
you can send text messages over these, you can send photos over these, you can have voice communications over these, you can see everybody's GPS. Furthermore, you can drop icons. So you can say, like, hey, watch out, there's a cliff there, and drop an icon right there and push that out to the mesh network. Also, let's say you were broke down or you found something, you could take a picture and send it to everyone else within the mesh network using Beartooth. And not only will you get the picture, but you'll also get overlaid on a map the angle that you were looking at when you took the picture.
Okay. So
So,
let's back up again.
for sure.
Uh you said this connects to your phone. So this is using cellular data.
No, this is all using the mesh network. The app is a front end and the radio is the back end.
Okay. So
Yes.
so the radio is sort of like your access point to
Yes.
this network. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's encrypted, so
Wow.
you can do encryption on it, and so those photos that you're sending throughout that mesh network are encrypted, and there's a ton of functionality you can do with it. These were on the ground when we exfilled at the Kabul airport, so these have been in use with like serious, operators. So it's used for that, right? It's used by law enforcement officers and military officials, uh, all over the place. But they are now, making it accessible to civilians. And the alternative to something like this would be a GoTenna, but GoTenna units are pretty pricey, and they also require a license to do encryption.
That was
But
my next
these
question.
Yeah, so these are on a different portion of the band that don't require a license at all. So where Go antennas are UHF or VHF in the ham bands, you have to have a business license for encryption. These are operating on what's known as the ISM band, and ISM band doesn't have any licensing requirements. And they're also $600 a piece with the discount code that we have, which is Gridbase 50. So if you're interested in Beartooth, go check that out. Use discount code Gridbase 50 to get yourself a pair of Beartooths. So
He
yeah,
is.
that's
I will reiterate. He is sponsored by them. If
I
you
am
like him,
sponsored by them.
I bet money he gets some kind of benefit out of that. So
Yeah, I
yeah.
do.
What was that code one more time?
Gridbase 50.
Okay, and that's at what website?
You go to Beartooth Radios. Just search
Okay.
Beartooth. It's on there. Yeah.
All right. So that's really really interesting. That can anybody, like you said, it's encrypted. So I mean, is this just like this roving, like assuming you're moving, right? You're a moving target and you have this mesh network. How far out can you stretch that mesh?
Yeah, you can stretch this mesh out safely. Again, we're talking about line of sight, right? Line of sight always matters. So if you're at the bottom of a valley and another guy's at the bottom of a valley, well, y'all aren't going to be able to talk. However, if you're able to get a drone in the air, or if you're able with one of these attached, or if you're able to get a guy at the top of that peak, now your mesh networking is happening, right? So with line of sight, you can expect about 10 miles.
Okay, dude, and most of the time it would be kind of silly to be that much separated, and it sounds like you start with that as an option for your communications, and then if you're going beyond that distance, you would use another solution, right?
You would use another solution, or you would get creative with the solutions that you have, right? So like I mentioned, putting it on a drone and getting it up in the air, that's giving you that line of sight. That's all you need. So if you get creative with some of these solutions, you can kind of find the workarounds once you understand the
Well,
fundamentals
that's
of
what I'm
how these
saying. Like you
work.
said, it's sort of max range would be about 10 miles.
Right.
And if you're going 20 miles, you would want to use something else. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right. Yeah. So for mesh networking at 20 miles, um, there's not really anybody out there that I know
I
of.
didn't necessarily mean mesh network. I more meant communication.
Oh, just communication in general. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Right. Well, I'm I think I'm understanding your question, which is that there's different tools for different tasks,
Right.
right? And not if you're going to be in a search and rescue party and y'all are going to be further than 20 miles apart, maybe you have to find a different solution, right? But this is understanding these solutions, understanding how they work. That's where we start. And I do here have to say that if you're feeling lost in this conversation or you're feeling like you need more, like you said, we can't cover everything in an
Yes.
hour.
It's not
Um,
possible.
I have a podcast as well. It's called Grid Based, and episode 2 and 3 is supposed to be able to get you fully up to speed. And I've received really positive feedback on that. So if you're
Okay.
looking for an in depth look at some of this stuff, please go check out Grid Based, BASED. It's on Spotify and everywhere else.
Okay.
Episode 2 and 3 is where you want to be able to digest more of what we've talked about in this episode.
Yeah, and I know, guys, and please give us some feedback if you want us to get Jake back on the show after this and do another talk about this, or on the main channel. Like, there's lots of opportunity here for us to dig into this. So we've got this idea of this sort of base station server, and we've got different kinds of comms for different solutions. Let's say you're setting up what would potentially be an off-grid. Let's go with the scenario like the grid goes down, right? You've got this base station that's broadcasting Wi-Fi. This is all assuming you have power. Let's start there. You have power. You're broadcasting your Wi-Fi. What would be your like top 3 type things that you would want beyond that to sort of create this network of communication?
Absolutely, yeah. So top 3 things I would want in a grid down scenario to be able to maintain communication. That's your question, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah. So from a radio standpoint, correct?
Just communication.
Okay. Um, Number one, I want to know how to whistle, and that might sound funny,
Okay.
but right, you can
I certainly
communicate.
don't know how to do that.
You can communicate a lot through whistles, right? And understanding, maybe developing a SOP for what different whistles mean, right? So in a no power situation, you're not going to have radios. So whistling is really important. And it's funny to say that and nobody talks about that, but that's seriously like legitimately one of my answers is knowing how to have a loud whistle because you could communicate very far without anything using a loud whistle and having a standard set of what those whistles might mean, right? So whistling is number one. It doesn't cost anything. Just go do
Okay.
it,
All right. I
right?
like that.
Kind of a funny answer, but it's true. Um,
That falls in line with the idea of caw.
yeah, yeah, it does.
It's that classic joke of being able and isn't there like a South American people that like communicate by whistles across
There
valleys?
is. Yeah, and also like in Los Angeles, like gangs have been known to whistle as well. So like gangs have been using whistling for like decades to be able to indicate whether or not like police are in a particular area. So yeah, there's South American tribes that do that. There's also gangs in Los Angeles that have been using whistles for a long time. Like
Wild.
I whistles isn't some like thing I just made up. Like whistles are a legitimate means of like long range communication,
Right, right.
like for people. And so anyway, whistling is one. The other one would be a good VHF UHF radio, right?
Okay.
So when I say a good VHF UHF radio, a bow thing would be just fine if that's what your budget dictates.
How much
But
are
some
they? Give us an
50
idea.
bucks, 50
Okay.
bucks,
All
yeah.
right.
But if you're looking for something that's waterproof and shockproof, something like a Yaesu VX6, Victor X-ray 6, um, that's going to be a waterproof, shockproof radio that has a ton of capability. So if you're looking to step up from a Baofeng from a higher quality standpoint, more functionality standpoint, you're going to be looking at something like a Yaesu VX6R.
Okay.
So a good VHF UHF handheld. Of course, I mentioned whistling, and I would have to say a mobile radio, a radio that goes in your car. And there's different ones. Like I'm not going to get into model names, right? But
Sure.
but the idea of having a mobile radio in your car serves two purposes. One, they're typically very easy to disconnect and you can get like a little battery pack to power it from. So you can put it in your backpack. The benefit of a mobile radio is that they often have much higher wattages, 25, 50 watts, right?
I
We
see.
talked
I
about we
see.
talked about power being a big deal for long range communications. So mobile radios have higher power outputs and so you can communicate further with them. But also having one in your car that's deployable so that you can, pass off a radio and still maintain comms in your car. That's going to be a net benefit. So if you're asking me what three things would I would want to know how to whistle. I want to make sure we have an SOP set up for whistling. I would want to have a good handheld radio, VHF or UHF handheld radio, and then I would want a mobile unit in my vehicle. So for vehicle comms or for being able to dismount, put into a backpack, and have a higher power radio in the field.
Okay. So my follow-up to that is this VHF handheld and then the mobile. What band column are we talked about these three bands? Where do they fall?
Sure. So those are GMRS and ham. So these radios can be
So they sort of
modified.
blend between the
Well,
two.
let's be clear, they don't blend, right? But when you buy a Corvette from the factory, you're not going to leave it stock, right? You're going to do some things to it. So these radios can very simply be unlocked to have access to both bands.
I see.
So yeah, they are made to be the FCC to get their license to sell them as radios. They have to be neutered to a certain extent, right? But they can be deneutered. And if that's something you want to do, it's very easy to do to create a radio that does both, right? So,
Okay.
so yeah, so we're talking about bands, GMRS and ham. Same thing for these mobile radios or these handheld radios. They're typically very easy to unlock on to get a wider spectrum of coverage.
Is that legal?
Sure, you know,
Well, we talked about the FCC.
hey man, free men don't ask. Okay, I'm not asking anyone's permission for how I get to communicate with my family.
All right.
Period. You
Okay.
know, and I've never the FCC doesn't have an enforcement arm. Okay, so if they're gonna start coming
That's
and
interesting.
hand checking every single radio to make sure it's compliant, we're gonna have a lot bigger problems than whether or not my radio is compliant. You understand?
Yep.
So I'm not concerned with that. And nor what it's like I said earlier. If I'm a car guy, I'm not talking about like if we're talking cars. I'm not like, do you have your CDL for that? I don't care.
Right.
Hey man, is that catalytic converter cut? Dude, that's not the question I'm asking. I like cars. Is it fast? Does it do shit? Like
Right.
that's what I care about. So If you're looking for a legal conversation guy, you need to go look at like Ham Radio Crash Course on YouTube, right? If you're concerned with legality, he's your man. I'm not here for legality. And there's a big difference in this community between like legacy hams and the people that are in here now who are just concerned about the tactical advantage that being able to communicate with their family offers, right? So I'm not a ham hobbyist. This never was a hobby for me. Understand that. I'm not a hobbyist. I'm someone who's interested in the tactical advantages of being able to understand communication if and when the ability to do that in a traditional format falls.
Mm.
So I'm not concerned with legalities. Now, I have my ham
do,
license.
do with that what you will.
Yeah, yeah. I
I
have my ham license because one thing about it, and in defense of having your ham license, it makes it to where I get to train a lot more because I am able to legally communicate on these towers and stuff, and so I get a lot more access to train as opposed to just like trying to work this out with my buddies in the shadows, you know.
Mhm.
So having a license does give me that ability, and having a license unlocks certain features that are gate kept by not having one, such as DMR. We talked about that a minute ago. You have
Right.
to have a license to register in their database to be able to use DMR services. So there are reasons to be licensed, but as far as legalities and radios and like all that kind of stuff, like it's not my number one focus or concern.
I feel like I need a chart laid out of all these different fucking
Look like
radios.
look like Charlie from Always Sunny with like the map, you know?
Yes, that's
Yeah, yeah.
that's exactly what I fucking need right now because there's a lot. There's a lot, man. It's like, well, this one follows here, and this one can do this,
For sure.
and
For the
and
person that may feel overwhelmed, this is what I say. Start with identifying who you want to talk to, because that you're not going to know it all. What you need
sure.
to do is identify who it is important for you to stay in contact with and research what options might be available for you to be able to make contact with that person. From there, do the rest, right? But don't be overwhelmed with, well, I got to know every option to make a decision. No, you don't. You need to know the requirements of where that person is that you want to talk to, and you need to find a solution that tackles that. Maybe you're not looking for that. Maybe you're just looking for like a 10 radio search and rescue pack that you can keep in your truck in the event everything shakes out, right? Well, in that case, you need a Retevis RT22 pre-programmed with no buttons, and then you can just start tossing them out to people, right? It
Sure.
doesn't You may have a different reason for needing radios in your life. Maybe it's to keep contact with somebody, maybe it's for a search and rescue endeavor, maybe it's for an airsoft milsim thing. Like I don't know. But when you identify who it is exactly that you need to communicate with, that's going to put you on the right track to understand that system, and don't get distracted with the rest that's out there. Be focused on the mission of making communications with the person that you identify or the group that you identify. It is important to maintain those comms with.
I think that's a great place to wrap this up, man. We have covered a lot of ground, and I really appreciate you being here and sharing this with us because holy shit. I have a lot to learn. I'm sure there's people in the audience that are screaming because they're more advanced. Whatever. I think it's been really eye-opening. It's been super helpful, and I appreciate you coming on the show, man. Is there
Absolutely.
a place that like you have a home base that people can find you?
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. So, of course, I already mentioned the podcast, Grid-Based. I do informational podcasts there. So, if this is something you want more information on, check that out. For the products that we manufacture and sell right here in Fort Worth, Texas, you can go to gridbase.net and check that out. We've got products there. We also are having a class coming up June 8th. And we're doing an outdoor comms practical. It's basically a zero to hero, get you spooled up on some of the different stuff that we talked about. So if you're local to this area or you want to fly out here, June 8th, we will be doing that class. And there's a link to buy a ticket on the website as well. Instagram is at gridbase.net. And of course, I have an awesome YouTube channel where I talk about all this stuff at length. So we have an intro to HF basics. It's a 5-part series. So if you really liked the HF stuff that we talked about and being able to communicate long range without anything in between you, simplex as we discussed, please go check out the introduction to HF series that's on YouTube. And if there's something that product specifically or comms focused or whatever that you have a question about, I offer consulting through Patreon. So my patrons can get consulting 30 minutes a week. We've got a scheduler on there. So
Oh
if
wow.
you're looking to develop a comms plan for your family and you want to speak with me directly about that, just become a patron. It's $10 a month. I've got a scheduler, schedule a time, and we can start to talk about what that may look like for you and your family. It's different than most people do it, where they charge you a consultation fee to sit there and do that. I just want this to be out there for everybody, and that's why I've done it through the Patreon. So if you go and subscribe to the Patreon, that's going to allow you to unlock that service from me. And that's patreon.com/gridbase. As always, shoot me an email, info@gridbase.net, if you have something very highly focused, or you want to collaborate or whatever. I'm always interested in
I
that.
feel like you just plugged every fucking bit of everything.
I
That
did.
is so much. That is so much. All right, guys, we're gonna wrap it up. I really appreciate you, Jake, and you guys know where to find him. There is so much info. I'm gonna see if we can get him maybe to come to GunCon
Let's
and
do
do a
it.
little seminar for some of you guys. I think that would be really interesting. Uh, as always, thank you all for watching, listening, etc. We'll see you soon.
Thank you for having me.